Okay, welcome back to the pod, guys. We have Pete with us today, who has done such incredible transformation in the men that he's worked with in their lives. So really excited to have him on today, onto the pod. Pete, thank you for being here. Could you give us just like a little intro about yourself? I know you were on here before, but we're expanding and just want to make sure we give a good intro to you and your background.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's good to catch up with you again. Oh, look, depending on where I want to start with like the intro, obviously, you said my name. I'm 28 years old. I am a men's coach. That's my job. That's my purpose. That's what I do. I help other men step into the truest version of themselves by getting underneath the pain that we've been living behind and underneath, essentially. So throughout that process, it's been a number of years where you can look back and doing this work and helping other people. You can ask the question, oh, when did you start? Well, I kind of started from when I was born, to be honest. Like that's the whole
Yeah,
story. It's my whole
yeah,
life led up to this point. And,
yeah,
something that we can relate to between like you and I as well, growing up in the Christian environment, going to church every Sunday and being put in positions of leadership from a very young age in an environment where a lot was asked of you, being in a place where you were expected to behave and dress and act and speak and talk in a certain way that was either right or wrong, and growing up feeling a lot of pressure and just not being seen. Throughout that process, I really buried parts of myself, and as I did that, I got into a marriage very early on, as I thought once again it was the right thing to do, and there was a
hmm
lot of pressure associated with that experience as well. And from that, I was basically a young man being driven by his pain of not feeling good enough and feeling like he had to please the people that were around him. And
yeah,
throughout that process, like I just saw so much ruin living that way. But not only that, like it was coming from a place of, I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to do well. I wanted to do better, but I just didn't know how to. So throughout that process, did the typical, get a job and jump from job to job to job, which was great, good experiences, had a blast in different areas of my life. But
mhm,
ultimately it came to the point where I had this realization where I really need to take ownership of what is going on in my own world, because I wasn't happy. But more than
yeah,
that, like I wasn't myself, and I felt like I
right.
just had to put up a front and I had to perform in order to feel worthy of the love that I was receiving. So from that point of really bringing on help from in the form of therapy and my own coaches that I've worked with over the years as well, I really stepped into this place. I was like, I want to help other men do this. And I had this desire many years ago, actually, but it just wasn't the right time. I was still figuring things out. I was still trying to
Yeah,
find myself in relative to like where I was in my own life. Like I wanted to figure out, okay, who am I? So I took a number of years to really just dive into self-discovery. What am I
yeah,
afraid of? And where are my wounds lying? Like what's actually hitting on these places in my own life of where I'm trying to distract myself, or I'm trying to work around different narratives in my own head, and how my wounds were playing out in different relationships I was in at the time.
yeah.
And a lot of the behaviors that I displayed were based in pain. Funny enough, it's like the things that I work with men around, it's kind of like I'm talking to myself many years ago. And
Mm.
it's beautiful to be able to be in this position now, because as I stepped into this space within the last year, there's really been a clarification along with that. And oftentimes, and this Chelsea as well, it's like when you help other people through based on what you've been through in your own life, in your own experiences, when you come from that place
Mhm.
of, oh, this isn't just something that I've learned and I'm gonna share it with others. Like, no, I've lived a life where I've made my partner the center of my universe, and I did everything I could to make her happy, and I felt like I was giving and giving and giving and getting nothing in return except resentment,
Mhm.
loneliness, exhaustion, and just
Mhm.
unexpressed anger. Being left with
Yeah,
that time and time again, I've lived that for so many years of my life. Being able
yeah,
to help men work through these wounds that they're holding on to and the experiences that they've been through that have somehow convinced them that they are the way they are because of their own faults, or they're bad, or they're not worth it, or there's something wrong with them, they're broken, they're not worth fixing, they're not worth loving, who's going to love me? It's like all those narratives that we play out, working to figure out, okay, how are you getting the evidence for that? When we construct the belief, we need the evidence to support it. So my work is in, okay, identifying, and then we work to shift it. And from that place, it's just giving the men the opportunity and the space to be able to feel the emotions that oftentimes we bury because we're scared of them. And oftentimes growing up, it's just like, okay, don't show your emotion because you're going to get rejected. Don't be vulnerable because you're going to get hurt. Have one foot in, one foot out. And there's a real, shall we say, there's a real lack of initiation for men as they step into manhood. And this is the work between, allowing a space for men to be able to step into the energy of a king from boy to man. That's that leadership. Okay, what do you actually want? Because now it's no longer, okay, how do I have to make my partner happy? Or what do I have to do to be accepted? How do I have to behave in order to be welcomed by my peers? Like, who am I really? All these questions that go around in our head, we're just figuring out, okay, we've got a role. We're supposed to lead. We're supposed to take on responsibilities. We're put at the front of so many things.
Yeah.
We haven't been given a blueprint in how to actually show up and take ownership of our own pain and to take ownership of the anger that we carry as men. None of these things are bad, but it's this unexpressed part of ourselves that we're burying that's just like, okay, that's going to leak out. This is the eye roll. This is the what? It's the disconnect. It's the shutdown. It's the avoidance. It's all these little things that it's just on the back end of all these things that we've just buried and pressed down. So in a nutshell, my work is that it's working with men to be able to identify, okay, like what have you been through that's causing you to behave like this? Because nothing's by accident. Nothing just happens the way it does by chance. Like there is a reason we do what we do. And oftentimes we don't really act in a way that's coming from a place of truth. And when I help men drop into the deepest parts of who they are, they always figure out, okay, I am actually worthy. I am enough. I am good enough. I deserve to be loved for who I am. I can own my shit. I can own my pain. And oftentimes, like when you have that full self-expression, as you start to speak to what you need and communicate your feelings and how you're showing up in the world and you cast the vision forth, you aren't able to shame yourself in that state, in that place where you know who you are and you live your truth forward and you speak with integrity, you act with integrity of words, of actions, of your soul. When you're in that place where you can lead, you can't shame yourself. It's impossible to. But it's the things that we don't express. It's the things that we don't allow our partners to see. That's the piece where it's like, okay, I don't deserve to be loved here. I'm going to hide this place. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's the work. That's where I'm at in my life where, it's my purpose. It's what I do. And oftentimes like I catch myself when I say, oh, I'm not actually working. I'm living in alignment with my purpose. And it's fucking cool to be in that place. So yeah.
Well, congratulations. I mean, I think that the number one thing is that you're doing it and you're leading by example. And that's the key word right there, like leadership, right, for men. And I heard popping up in different words, but in so many words, you're saying the same thing, which is leading and accountability. Those are two things that I heard pop up through that synopsis of kind of what you do, right, and what that looks like. And holding space for men to digest their feelings, to express their feelings, to, like Kate says, shame dies on exposure, right? So when you can own, like, this is who I am, like, this is my darkness, like, that is so beautiful. And it's incredible, like 9 times out of 10, when you express, like, this is my dirtiest part of myself, people will be like, oh my gosh, I can relate. And like, I have dirty parts too. And then you start being like, I'm still lovable after that, and start realizing like that's what makes us so human and it's so beautiful. And it's not necessarily that it's not wrong. Like, we do have to take accountability for those bits, for those parts that we're not proud of, but we don't have to be ashamed of them, right? Because we then start looking into, why did I feel the need to do those things? And then can be consciously relating with others. And, some of the most beautiful parts in my most recent relationship that was very healthy, we were able to communicate and be like, okay, why did you feel the need to do that? And once we work through that, it's groundbreaking. relationship actually grows and gets so much stronger. And that goes for like friendships too, right? And family members. I've had times with my mom when I just sat down and was able to be like, this hurt, or this is how this felt, right? And when you express to another person, like, I'm scared and this is why I acted that way, walls are broken down in those moments. One of the biggest things, okay, a couple questions, like from a male point of view, what is your kind of take on, as you're doing this work, love versus respect? Do you think that men, because I keep hearing this coming up in the coaching space with men, is it more important for men to be loved or respected?
Well, look, first thing that comes to mind, there was a quote that was once said that love without respect is just pity.
Okay.
So the premise of being able to be loved by a woman, we don't actually value that as much as we value respect. So this is where it comes into this dynamic of when, like, the woman is a representation of the man in that sense. So in relationship and in partnership, I've experienced both sides where the connection that I have with my partner that I'm in partnership with right now, we have so much that we've shared with each other, all our wounds and everything that we are up until this point. We've seen that and we've held each other in that. Yeah. But we've also experienced times when we felt disrespected by the other person. Now, for a man to feel disrespect from his woman, whatever your, I guess, whatever you deem to be disrespectful in the premise of the container of love in which you're in. Right. Let's just say that if you feel disrespected, if the man feels disrespected, he's going to question his own self-worth because the woman represents him. Like, she is supporting him in that sense. And even I had this conversation the other day, even if you go back to, like, whether you're religious or not, like back to Bible times, Eve was created from Adam's rib, but that was by his side. It wasn't below him and it wasn't above him. There's a partnership that's involved with the intimacy of a relationship. So when you think about it, when you're in partnership and connection with a lover in that sense, she represents you. So if she's doing something or something's taken place where the man feels like, okay, that's actually not representing me in truth, it's not aligned with us in that way, that disrespect, he's going to question, okay, what am I doing with my life? Is this something that I've done? Have I created this in that way? Because there's the recognition that whilst he's in partnership with her, for the man that really values that connection with his woman and the premise of the respect level that they both have for each other, if that gets disregarded, then he's going to drop into the state where his whole world starts to shake just that little bit. So I would say directly that they do work together in that sense, but love is a form, or respect is a form of love when you really break it down, especially in partnership. And I've found that through my experiences of, I guess, interacting with disrespect, betrayal, like however you want to speak into that, that has brought me to some of the lowest places in my life where I've questioned not only what's actually happened and the things that I didn't see and what I didn't address and the conversations that I didn't actually have because I didn't want to come across needy. I didn't want to come across like I was insecure or that type of guy, I always looked at myself and my actions of how I interacted with that and said, okay, look, before anything else, I've disrespected me. I've betrayed myself in this because I chose not to see certain things when you look back. And it's funny you mentioned this. The number one thing that I talk about with the men that I work with that always comes up is betrayal. They feel disrespected by their partner. And oftentimes the conversations start off like, okay, she's doing this, like she's not doing that. Like every time she does this, I just get pissed off and yada, yada, yada. I'm like, okay, you're the common denominator here, bro. And as we start to really look at things from that perspective, okay, what are we taking ownership for here? And in times where I've experienced it in my life, the hardest thing to come to terms with was that I betrayed myself before anyone else betrayed me. That doesn't mean what happened doesn't need to be taken accountability for. It doesn't mean the other person didn't do something that they shouldn't have in that sense, or they've crossed boundaries in the relationship. Doesn't take the responsibility off them to own that for themselves. But initiating it, that's the part of me that attracted that in, because on some level, I thought that I deserved it. And now this is the thing, right? when a man experiences this in relationship, he's going to question himself, because now it's not like, hey, you did this, you shouldn't have done that. It's, you did this, but did I cause that? What is it
So
about
here's
me
my
that brought
question.
that
Do
in?
you think that do you think it happened because you deserved it? Or do you think it happening and you reacted in a way that you shouldn't have? You should have stood up for yourself or set down your boundaries, but you didn't because you justified to yourself that you deserved it.
Yep. Yep.
Which
So
one?
this goes back to the first thing we spoke about. It's like nothing happens just by accident. People
Right.
just don't do things out of, let's just say, spontaneity, if you want to call
Mm.
that. Although it seems like that in the
Okay.
moment, I
Mm-hmm.
believe that there are things that are at play that we don't see. The energy that we attract in, the people that we interact with. We look at the world based on the view that we have of ourselves and what we think we're worth. And this is the thing that so many people would want to disregard when they come in contact with someone that's brought pain into their life, or someone that's betrayed
Right.
them, or someone that's hurt them in some way. It's easier for us to look at that and say, this person's a piece of shit. They treated me so wrong. You know, fuck all men, fuck all women. And there's this real narrative. Let's go to war with the opposite gender to figure
Yeah.
out, okay, what do we have to actually avoid in my life so I can use someone else to be the scapegoat. When you
Mm-hmm.
flip that, it's like, okay, like what's the part of you that felt like you deserve this? What was your relationship with your mum and dad like? What did you have to do? What did you have to give up? Because you
Yeah.
did that first, right? And this is the thing. It's like when we have this belief about ourselves, we will always give ourselves the evidence for it. So if a man
Mm-hmm.
believes that he doesn't deserve to be loved and he's not worth it, then he's going to do everything he can to prove himself. Now, in that
Mm-hmm.
proving, he's going to suck the life out of his partner and constrict her and suffocate her to the point where she's like, I'm out. I can't do this anymore. And then he'll be like, I knew it. I knew I wasn't good enough. And this happens every time. What's the point of even trying? I'm going to have 1 foot in, 1 foot out on the next one, because she's just going to end
Right.
up leaving the same way the last one did, because I'm not
Right.
good enough. So we play out all the scenarios. So in answer to your question, I think the long way around, I do
Okay.
believe that respect is one of the most important things, but it has to come from the person who initiates that first. And from the man side of thing, if he doesn't respect himself enough to speak his own truth and to set the boundaries of the relationship and to lead the conversations around that and work with his partner to figure out, okay, what do we want in this relationship? What don't we want?
Mm-hmm.
What sort of people do we want to interact with? Are we comfortable, going on a coffee date with the opposite sex alone? Like, what time should we contact our friends that are female at night? Like, all this sort of stuff. Like, these are the conversations that need to be had. And oftentimes, it's this narrative of, let's just date to date and we'll figure it out. It's all good. And then it's just like, oh, I don't want to say anything because I'm going to come across like really needy and
Yeah.
insecure, and she's going to leave me, because there's this fear that if we speak to what our truth is and to what's actually bothering us, then our partner is
Yeah.
going to reject us. So the things
Yeah.
that we don't say, that's out of fear. And this is the part where it's like, you need to find that part of you that is afraid to speak your truth, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not there because you believe it for yourself. You've been convinced for some
Yeah.
reason or another. Doesn't matter what age it was, you adopted that belief, and now your
Yeah.
behaviors are displaying that. So it's such an interesting game when you look at it like that, of why we do the things that we do. And here's the thing, Charles, when I catch myself doing shit like this, it's
Mm-hmm.
so frustrating, because part of me has an awareness around what's actually happening, which is
Mm-hmm.
great. It's a superpower. But sometimes I still do the same damn thing, and I'm like, far out.
Me
I just
too.
want to change this right now. So sometimes there's that desire to just have ignorance around it, because they say ignorance is bliss. Ignorance
Yeah.
is bliss until it's not. And
Yeah.
oftentimes we just get ourselves wrapped up in this cycle of pain and toxic behavior that just goes round and round and round and round until something catastrophic takes place. And
Right.
oftentimes a man won't change unless he encounters either a death of a loved one, a breakup, an injury to his body, something that shifts his whole life upside down and throws him into the chaos of the underworld, so to speak, because
Mm-hmm.
we are so not even stubborn, but we don't like change in that sense. And for a man to keep resisting the urge and the opportunities that life presents him to make those small adjustments along the way, sooner or later, the more you resist it, it gets to that point where it's like, okay, like I'm doing this for your own good, but this is going to hurt. Here you go. And then something just breaks. And then all of a sudden he has a choice. It's like, okay, fuck, like this is the premise in which the men that I work with, they reach out. Like, I'm going through a breakup. I've just come out of a divorce. I've just been dumped by the person that I've been with for 5 years. I'm at my lowest point right now, which is so beautiful when you see the level of vulnerability in that place. Because even looking back to, for both of us, like those times in our life where we felt the most broken, you can look back and think that was actually the catalyst that I needed to become the person that I am today. And it's actually Steve Jobs that says you can't really connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking back. He was right in that sense, you know, because these opportunities that have been presented to us, yes, they are so devastating in the moment and they hurt so much, but we don't need to avoid them. We don't have to bury all the emotions and the feelings that come along with a breakup. We don't have to go on a rampage and run through like 40 different women just to feel a sense of, oh, I'm actually good enough. Like, fuck this bitch, she shouldn't have dumped me. And this tone that men take, it's really just bitter. And it drives them for this feeling of validation from the things that are around them. And oftentimes there's a culture in that where it's just like the men who do the same thing with their behaviors that they display, they will start to find other men that do the same thing, and they'll encourage.
I think that's the same with men and women, right? You surround yourself with people that make you feel less guilty about whatever things that you're doing, right? Because then you can just keep doing them and you don't feel bad. And whether that's eating nachos or, you know what I mean, like binge drinking for 7 days straight and snorting cocaine up your nose, like, you know, whatever it is. But you don't want to be around people who are like, you know, waking up at 5 a.m. like and getting ripped if you just really want to eat nachos and don't want to feel bad about it, you know, like, it's, you know, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. 100%. I definitely think that goes for males and females.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, like even when you were mentioning your family and your friends in that dynamic as well, it's like when you start to really clarify your own existence, these relationships that you have, you'll start to feel the shift take place as well. And when you get really clear on how you want to show up in the world, people's view and their reality starts to change as well, because it's like, why aren't you coming out on the weekend with us? Like, why aren't you drinking with us anymore? Like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? You think you're better than us? And the tone starts to change because now all of a sudden your change and your healing and your growth, however you want to state or phrase that, that's starting to shed light on the areas in other people's life that they're not taking responsibility for, which is okay, right? And this is the thing. It's like when people get into this place where it's like, I'm on my journey of healing, I'm growing, I feel good, you know, I feel like I'm letting go of so many things that have been holding me back. Times you can see that there is a tone of judgment that comes along with that, because it's like, now I'm better than you, I don't do that anymore, I don't want to talk about that, that's just not in alignment with me. I'm like, all right, let's just chill with that for a second, you know, because at the end of the day, like everyone is experiencing the things in their own life that they're ready for in that sense, whether it's a breakup, whether they're just getting into a relationship, whether they feel like it's the right partner or not. Like that is their partner, you know, that is their pain, that is their journey. And the lessons that they can learn from that will be predicated on their ability to show up for them. So they can avoid and distract and shut down and disconnect as much as they want to, but ultimately, it's like when the opportunity presents itself to support or be there for someone, that's a beautiful thing. But the narrative of like, I'm better than, or my partner needs to start doing the work, they need to start healing. And this is also the thing that I really experience with the females that reach out for their partner. And they're like, how can I help my man heal? What can I do to make my partner see this? Can you follow him so he follows you back, and you send him your reels and all this sort of stuff? I'm like, okay, all right.
I get that too. Why isn't this on her page? I'm like,
on one hand, it's really heart-wrenching, because I feel for the women who are in this position where they want and they can see that things could be so much better with their partner, but he's refusing to step up and approach those challenges with, okay, let's figure this out. There's always that disconnect. And for the women who are in that position, it's such a lonely place to be in. And I've talked to so many women around that where they're like, what can I do to help? How can I help him see? And the hard truth is that for a man, like if he does not want to heal, if he doesn't want to actually interact with his own fears, then nothing's going to convince him to. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, this is what brings, hey, my partner just dumped me. I feel like, I need to change. Some things need to change in my life. We're put in this position where like undescribable pain is the only thing that can shift that for us sometimes. And, for the women in that position where they see these pain-based behaviors coming through with their partner, on one hand, I say, look, all the love too, like I feel for you. It's such a difficult place to be in. And from that, it's like they ask, what can I do? What can I do? And my answer is always the same. Like, don't beg for what you want, first and foremost. If you want your man to step up, if you want him to change, if you want him to start leading from the front and to be able to lean into the difficult conversations and connect with you and develop intimacy that's not just in the bedroom, like in your life together, then you have to know and get clarity on what it is that you want in the relationship, but don't beg for it. If he's not willing to show up for it, that's not on you. That's his thing to work through. And oftentimes the dynamic in a relationship, as we've probably all heard, like for people who are in the personal development space, it's like your partner will always mirror the parts of you that need a little bit more love in that sense. So when a woman asks, so what can I do? Be yourself. Take ownership of your own pain. Interact with your own wounds and show up in that level of not trying to change or fix or control or limit the damage that's being done. Like turn that energy around and put it back in internally and figure out, okay, how can I hold myself in this pain? How can I move through this? Because in that sense, if you can show up in that way, then you're actually mirroring the parts with your partner anyway. From that place, okay, like you are triggering areas in him that he knows that he needs to change. That's why he's avoiding. That's why he's shutting down. So you are doing
on those in yourself.
Yeah.
Where is the line between like doing that? Like, I understand if like someone feels like, he's not doing the dishes enough, like basic problems, right? Basic problems, but you know what I mean? Like nothing detrimental. He's not showing up. He doesn't ask me out on dates. I understand. And I've been in a position where I was like, okay, cool. You're not going to do it. I'm going to do it for myself. And then what happens is he sees that and he actually ends up doing that because I'm not there begging for it. Like I can show up for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a difference between that and someone who really isn't emotionally showing up, isn't emotionally available, is shutting down this or that. Like, where do you think the line is between like, okay, well, I need to actually walk away at this point because I'm not serving myself by staying in a relationship where they're not willing to work on themselves. Now, granted, like in a perfect world, right, you just wouldn't get to that place. Hopefully you're not getting in a relationship with someone who's not emotionally available, but sometimes that stuff does rear its teeth after getting in a relationship, right? When stuff gets more intimate, it gets more scary. And sometimes when you get more intimate or when all of a sudden commitment happens, that's when people get the most scared, right? Because then you have to show up and then you're afraid you're going to get rejected because they're going to see those dark parts of you. So what's your opinion on that? Like, where's that line?
Yeah, well, I think, there's one thing that's like, you have to be able to communicate first and foremost and get clear, as we said before, on what you actually want and the areas for yourself that, okay, like this is what I'm struggling with you. And this is how you doing these things makes me feel. And then pay attention to how he sees you in that. That's the main thing, right? So I will never say this is what you have to watch out for and then you can leave, essentially. That's just never going to be an answer from me. Leaving should be the last option. It really should, in my opinion, as someone who's gone through separation, divorce, all that side of things as well. If you can develop the tools and the techniques along the way where both parties can show up and do the work, do it. Don't just throw in the towel straight away. There's always something else you can do. However, in answer to your question with the nuance involved as well, that expression of what you need from your partner, his reaction to that will tell you all you need to know on that front. Now, here's the thing. It's like with that, there is a space for you to be able to hold yourself and create that sense of safety in your own body as the woman. You can support him. You can put all the steps in place where you can say, can we go see couples counseling? Can we have a chat later on? Can we do da 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 da? Like you can reach out and extend the lifeline, so to speak. Now, if that constantly gets shut down, then the thing is that you always have the capacity to show up more, but you also have the capacity to love more as well.
Yeah.
Now, just because you can love more doesn't mean you should stick around and be disrespected. Just because you can love more doesn't mean that you should get home and get berated for not having dinner prepped beforehand and all that sort of stuff that goes on. That's unacceptable. No one deserves that, really, when it comes to partnership. So the line around that is, what capacity are you at? And this is the thing as well. It's like, leaving should be your last option. But if you do choose to leave, then make sure that you give yourself the grace and forgiveness to leave. Because oftentimes we bury that pain. It's like, fuck this person, I'm out. And it's anger, it's resentment, it's bitterness. It's like, no, I'm sorry that I'm going to leave. Like, I feel really bad about this. I don't want this to happen. This isn't what I signed up for. I didn't want to go through this. So there's a grieving process that needs to happen. But in, I guess, retrospect to your question, if you feel like you have done everything that you can to reach out, to set the ground, to be able to have the conversations, to hold yourself in that and not react, and be able to give grace and to support. If the actions aren't being met and he's refusing to interact with that and he doesn't want to actively take steps towards growth, then the ball's in your court. Like, you have the right to make whatever decision you want. But ultimately, it comes back to what it is that you want and what you're willing to move through. Because some people stay because it's comfortable and they would rather stay in the familiar pain than feel the fear of stepping out and having to restart. And I say restart with quotation marks, or find something else, or move on to a different state of life, or different locations. It's all of that is involved as well. So if you know for sure that you're at a place that's like, I can't do this anymore, then take the leave. That's fine. Like, do what you have to do. And I think the main premise of partnership when it comes to the dynamics between the man and the woman is like, do you have the capacity to meet your partner for where he's at? Do you have the capacity to meet your partner for where she's at? So if he doesn't have the emotional intelligence to have a conversation around how he feels, can you help him figure that out? Can you offer some help in terms of, hey, listen to this interview, or maybe let's go see some couples therapy, or something along those lines? It's like, yeah, all right, I'll give it a crack. Cool. That's something you can work with. But if it's like, nah, fuck that, I don't need a therapist, and all this sort of stuff that goes on, it's just like, okay, like, maybe he doesn't have capacity. That's the things that you should pay attention to. So when you speak to the things that you want in a relationship, ideally you'd have that conversation before you actually step into the relationship with someone. Like, they're good conversations to have. But if you're in that place where it's like, hey, I realize that there's some things that are lacking, have been lacking for the last 12 years in my relationship. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to start dumping, hey, we need to get better at communicating. You need to see me and you need to hold space. Like, what the fuck is going on? Have grace for that as well, because it's a learning process. But I guess in context of everything we're speaking about, you have to be able to communicate that. And it ultimately comes back to that with everything. Do you have the capacity to express what you need? And does your partner have the capacity to meet you there and hold you in that? That's the main thing to look for. So whether it's you both moving through the betrayal, whether it's both of you figuring out how to have better conversations without yelling at each other, do you guys have the ability to meet each other in that place and come back to love every single time? So yes, you can disconnect, but you come back to love. Yes, you can leave the house in a frenzy and say, I don't want to ever talk to you again, but do you come back? And do you figure it out to be able to move through and learn for the next time? It's that energy that you want. So people don't have to be perfect. People don't have to have so much emotional intelligence that they can just walk into a room and like, I see you feeling a bit sad. What can I do to help? Some people just aren't geared that way, and that's okay. Sometimes they actually have to see tears rolling down your face. But this is where it's like, okay, like, have the conversation around it. Don't just disconnect and get frustrated and start
Yeah.
judging and yelling because you're not getting what you want. This is about
Yeah.
teamwork. It's called
Yeah.
partnership for a reason. You know, I
Yeah.
think if you have the capacity to make it work, make it work. But if your partner's not willing to meet you in that space of let's grow, let's learn, let's figure this out, we can do this, we got this, then
hmm
you've got some important decisions to make.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, like you were saying earlier, like a lot of people like just jump into relationships prematurely before, ideally you kind of figure out if these things are there or not. If these conversations, like how the communication is there or not before you start dating. And like I haven't been in a relationship in 3 years, which is wild and like not something most people would brag about. But for me, it's like a huge bragging right because I'm like, I never, I never was this careful before. Like I would get into a relationship because I wanted to be in a relationship or I wanted it to work. But now like guys run for the wind. And I actually just went through something a couple of times actually in the past year, multiple situations where I was like wondering why they walked away and ended up finding out like they knew they were not ready to be what I needed. So by voicing what my needs were and by finally being able to step into my own energy and in my feminine energy and be like, this is what I can provide and this is where I'm at and this is what I need from you. And it's scary because like you said also earlier, we were talking about like as kids, like, especially being a people pleaser, especially growing up in the church, like I was taught like not to do any of that stuff. Like I'm still on a regular basis. I was just telling my girlfriend, like I'm called these days like a bitch or ruthless or all these things. You know what I mean? It's like I ask 30 questions before when I start dating someone. I'm like, well, why wouldn't I do that? Like, why waste your time or mine? I'm respecting you and me by inquiring about these things because if I don't know where you're at, why are we going to continue if we're not on the same page of these things that we want? Because like you said, like if you don't talk about it now, it's going to come out 3 years from now and there's going to be a whole screaming argument over something we could have discussed at dinner for 2 seconds, like, and that could be as simple as like, do you want kids? Like, and people are like, why would you ask that on the first date? Why wouldn't you? Because eventually, like, it's going to come out. Maybe not on the first date, maybe that's soon, but the point is like, yeah, I think that communication and like just being open about your needs will help to prevent these arguments that can come along down the line. And then hopefully by then you'll figure out how each other communicates and be able to work through these things.
Yeah.
But
also like the dynamics of that too is like, I guarantee that if you're the one that's leading that conversation, you're going to scare most men away. Right. Because the thing
Probably,
is,
yeah.
like, oh, far out, like she's a bit too intense and, I've just been interrogated. And oftentimes that's not even a turn off, but like that scares men because here's the thing about that. Like for a man who's like, cool, let's get it. Let's have this conversation. That's a form of masculinity on their end to be able to lead the conversations around that. So oftentimes when women feel like they need to step up to be able to make sure that they don't get hurt in that sense, that also comes from the energy of the masculine as well. So this is the dynamics. Is like when a guy's talking to a woman and she's in her masculine, he's seeing her as a threat. It's like, are we about to fight right now? Like, I don't actually know what's going on. Like, I'm on a date. I'm getting prepped. But
it's so funny.
Though,
yeah.
This is the cycle. It's like when men start to slip back down, it's like, okay, look, that's not for me. It's like, whoa, she's too much. And they avoid conversations around this because they don't have the capacity to lead. The women are like, well, okay, now we've got to figure this out as well. So we're going to have to become the interrogator. We're going to have to figure out how we're not going to get hurt. We're going to have to make sure he's doing all that he can to lead us in that sense. So all of a sudden, it's like, cool, let's go after the puppets that can't be reliable in that sense. So it does no one a service, like when men are put in these positions where they don't feel like they have the tools to be able to step up and have these conversations, to be able to hold space. Because here's the thing as well, it's like the feminine energy in itself is absolutely chaotic. And that's great because it's so intense where you can be crying 1 second and then just have a fucking rage go through you and the whole house is about to burn down, which is awesome. But think about it in terms of like the feminine energy is like a really strong river. It's like the river that you would step into and your feet would just get swept out from under you. The masculine energy is the rock bed that's allowing the river to flow steadily downstream. It's aggressive. It's going to get you if you step into it because you won't have the ability to stand. But what's holding that is the rock bed on the side. And that's the masculine energy. It grounds, it solidifies, it's able to channel the feminine energy. So everything you've got, Charles, like it's a superpower, like your ability to call the shots, your ability to step up and be noticed in that way. But you are going to scare off the guys that don't have the capacity to channel that because they haven't met themselves.
That's a good thing, isn't it?
Exactly. So when you run into the fella you feel is going to be able to allow you to flow with what he can create with you, that's going to be your sign, right? That he has the ability, like he is grounded in himself to be able to step into that role. Now it's not a struggle because so many relationships, they go through this stage where it's like, cool, let's meet. We had a great connection. It was a great first date. We're heaps good in bed together, all this sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden we start to see a power struggle come into play. It's like, no, I don't want you to see this part of me. I'm going to shut down. What? You don't want to talk? And then all of a sudden the woman's like, okay, he's not leading. He's avoiding something. I have to figure this out. Let's get to work. It can look like snooping. It can look like interrogation. It can look like just observing and stepping back and not leaning in. I'm going to withhold sex. I'm going to do all these things just so I can get him to open. Yep, all of it. It's a power struggle because neither person wants to get hurt. And the thing is with this is when you interact with someone along this lines, okay, I need you to make me feel better. I need you to be my purpose in life. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. You give me life. You know, I couldn't live without you. All these sayings that are so romantic in that sense, they're so like debilitating from both ends. It's like, oh my God. Like we are actually putting each other in a position where you're responsible for my happiness. You're supposed to serve me in a way that makes me feel good enough to be with you. And this is the thing, it's like when you're in partnership with a person like this, then you will never be able to do enough. You'll never get it right. And there's only a certain amount of time until things start to shift towards you in terms of it's your fault. You're the one. You did this. Not doing this. Not enough. All this sort of stuff that comes out. It's like, do we have the capacity to meet ourselves where we are at in our own pain? And for guys, I can speak to this so clearly because one, I've lived it, but the work in which I do is like, okay, like you're afraid, dude. Like you are scared of getting hurt because the last time that you opened up to a female, that was your mum. And then she went off and started dating 6 different dudes and you felt stranded. And now all of a sudden you can't trust women. So the closer you get in relationship, the more vulnerable you get, you're going to want to shut down. You're going to want to avoid. And that's where you're going to start to look at other women outside the relationship because they don't treat you the way your partner does. Like, do you have capacity to meet yourself in that? Okay, what did you experience as a boy? Feel that emotion. Is it pain? Like, is it sadness? Is it resentment? Is it anger? That unexpressed anger that we didn't get to actually speak to when we were kids because we didn't know how? Is that what you're holding on to, where you're judging your woman? Where you're being super critical of her outfits and how she looks and, you know, like you're not really supporting her goals and you don't actually show up and serve her in that way? Like, what's the reason for that? Like, meet yourself there. And then all of a sudden, everything becomes so much more simple because now when you're interacting with someone, it's like, okay, I don't have to figure you out to how to change you. I don't have to look at all the things you're doing and think, okay, that's not going to happen. We won't be doing that. And all this tone of it is like this is how you have to behave, just like when we were kids. And for a man to be in that place where he's operating from the energy of a boy, where he's energetically tied to that energy of a boy, like he's looking to his partner to make him feel better, to be coddled, to make everything be all right, where he just wants to be fed and then have his belly rubbed. Like that is what we're talking about when we're I guess experiencing these behaviors where the woman doesn't feel like she's being led. She doesn't feel like she knows what's going on. He disconnects, he shuts down, he avoids, he works himself to the ground. Like there's fear there. And for the
Yeah.
men who are in that place, it's like, it doesn't have to be that way. And every time there's like, when they meet a woman who's in her full expression, who's living her life as like, this is me, this is who I am. A man who
Mm-hmm.
is hiding from these parts of himself that he refuses to look at, and he's been using things to distract himself, and he's in that energy of a boy, he'll cower to that. He'll shame himself and he'll hide away in the shadows. And this is where it's just like, I'm out, too much, not for me, because they don't
Mm-hmm.
have the capacity to hold that. Now, as we said before, it's not bad. Like, it just is what it is. But for the women as well, it's like, clarify that. You know, pay attention to what he's doing and how he's meeting you. And if you feel the need to control, there's two things at play. It's like, okay, maybe there's something in you that's scared of getting hurt. So maybe you're looking a bit too far into what he's doing to make sure that you can actually predict when something's going to go wrong because your dad
Mm-hmm.
left you when you're a kid, like whatever that is, honor that,
Yeah.
look to that because you're going to be driven by it. But also, does he have, like, is he showing signs that he's grounded? Does he know what he
Yeah.
wants? Does he know where he's going? Is he led by something more than himself? What's his drive? Like, does he have the ability to communicate? Does he look after himself? Is he respectful? Like all these things that you have to
Yeah.
take note of, because here's the thing. It's like for a woman, the investment isn't just, oh, we're going to create a life together. It's like, no, this dude's going to have my babies. Like biologically, we're going to be bound in that way. So there's a lot riding on this. And for the
Mm-hmm.
guy as well, like the investment, I use that respectfully as well. Like the investment is
Yeah.
the mother of his like children, his offspring. Like she is going to be the one that nurtures that, you know. On both ends, there's some really important things that are going on that can't be overlooked in that sense of like, okay, you gotta figure out, you know, what's driving this person. Are they in touch with who they
Yeah.
really are? And that doesn't mean that they're 100% healed and they're never going to have wounds show up and, you know,
Yeah.
nothing's going to go wrong and they won't ever avoid certain things and you'll find stuff out that you don't like. It doesn't mean that at all. But it just
Mm.
means that you both have the capacity, as you've given each other that sense of evidence, that you can trust it. You can trust him
Yeah.
to help when times get tough or to have the conversations and to work through the challenges that come up. Yeah. Look, I don't even remember the question you asked, to be honest. And I know I just
I
rambled
don't know,
through.
but you got to some really great points. Really great points. I mean, just being vulnerable and being able to show up and being able to work through it. I got some really good questions actually on my poll today that I put on Instagram.
Let's go.
Speaking of being vulnerable, okay, one of them, going through a divorce. My other half was abusive. Any advice? And this is coming from a guy, not a female.
Okay. Yeah. Been there.
So I gave him my advice coming from abuse, but coming from a male who's been there, I would love to hear your point of view.
Yeah. Allow yourself to feel into the rage that you didn't express
Yeah.
when you were with her.
Mm.
Here's the thing about that. The dynamics at play is like when you are in, whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse, oftentimes it's
Mm-hmm.
both if you're in the environment for long enough. You
Mm-hmm.
are placed in a situation where it's going to pull out some real darkness in you. And if you
Mm-hmm.
stay there long enough, you'll do things that are going to follow you for the rest of your life. So
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes men are told not to be physical with a woman, respect and all that sort of stuff. But in that, there's some pieces that he has to shut down. Like if he's exposed to that abuse
Yeah.
often in the relationship, and oftentimes this is something that gets overlooked because it's like, oh, stature wise, men are stronger than women, emotionally and physically as well. In that sense, I'm not saying that's the case because sometimes it's just not. Like it's not the case, but in that sense, it's like there is some real damage that's done when a man faces that abuse regularly, because he has to bury parts of himself and he'll oftentimes look at it like, hey, it's my fault. Like something's wrong with me. Like I deserve it. And when you're in that place where you feel like you're being attacked, but you can't really do anything, like you can't really stand up for yourself, not the same way if another guy was doing that, because you'd put an end to that really quickly. But you
Yeah.
can't do that in that situation. And
Yeah.
oftentimes the best and safest way to move forward in that is to shut down just to try and survive. But what happens is, just like the energy of a boy as well, it's like when we've gone through these experiences where we haven't been able to have that healthy expression of anger,
Yeah.
of like, okay, like my boundaries are being crossed right now. This is not okay. I'm going to stand up for myself. Bang, here's the anger. And you're
Yeah.
voicing what you need to. out of safety, so it doesn't turn into something more than just words, you know? When you
Yeah.
don't have the ability to express that because you think it's your fault and you shame yourself, then oftentimes there's a slight hum of anger that just sits below. So that unexpression, that would be the thing, like for me, that I've had to really work to develop a relationship with,
Mhm.
because I just didn't express it because I thought I couldn't. And for that, there is the aftermath of like it's here, I have to move it. So for me, like being able to channel that in ways that are healthy and not through like reactivity. And oftentimes
Yeah.
when the burial of these emotions take place, especially anger for men, it's the road rage. It's the always getting into the fights, or what the fuck are you looking at? It's like someone looks at them
Yeah.
wrong and they just see red and they're ready to go. Like this is
Yeah.
unexpressed anger. So being
Right.
able to move this in a way that's healthy through training, moving your body, breath work, screaming, hitting the mattress, yelling into a pillow, all these sort of things that I use to be able to
Mhm.
move it out instead of keeping it locked in, because it's
Yeah.
debilitating and it weighs on you physically as well.
Yeah.
And
Or even
oftentimes,
going to like one of those, like, what is it called? The rage cage rooms, and just letting it out, like just go break stuff. And I mean, I've never actually thought about that. Like, I definitely have encouraged, obviously, breath work, meditating, working out for sure. I mean, that's for me. Like, I'll go, I don't box, but I'll box if I'm really going through some stuff,
yeah,
like,
nice.
but that's, I mean, screaming into pillow, letting it out, like
Yeah.
just getting it vocally out, I think actually does something within us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this goes further than just talking about it as well, because oftentimes when
Mm.
even going to therapy, it's like you talk about it and you just feel validated for what you've been
Yeah.
through. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
cool. Now what? Like I've spoken about it, but I don't have any pushback. I don't have, hey, cool. That's sweet. This way coaching is great, because it's like, well, how did you attract that situation? What made you think you deserve to be abused every single day? It's like, what did you go
Mm-hmm.
through as a child? It's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Now we're hitting some nerves, because
Yeah.
now it's just like, oh, how does that make you feel? Cool. All right, let's get to work on what's actually driving that. And it brings up so many different emotions for men. But anger is one of those things that's really looked upon shamefully. It's like every time that we
Mm-hmm.
see anger in like the news, some woman's being attacked or assaulted,
Yeah.
or some like a child's being murdered, or like physically
Yeah.
abused, domestic violence, all this sort of stuff. This is unexpressed rage. And all you
Mm-hmm.
need is when you hold on to that long enough, where you get three terrible things line up in a day. That's what we see. The parents have taken the life of their child. That's where we see like someone's been thrown in front of a train. It's like all these things that happen, like there's a reason for it. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes, like we don't want to look further than that, but to develop a relationship with anger, like it is another emotion. Just because you
Yeah.
feel joy doesn't mean you can't feel anger. It's like, why are we
Yeah.
why are we celebrating for feeling, oh, I feel so at peace. I
Yeah.
feel fucking mad. I'm angry.
Yeah.
I feel this in my body. It's like, oh no, don't feel that. It's okay. Just don't cry, or don't be so hard on yourself. Like what the
Yeah.
fuck? Like it's an emotion. It needs to be
Yeah.
felt. But the key
Yeah.
is to be able to move it and
Mm.
interact with it. So when you're in that state, it's like, all right, I'm about to move and lean into this. It's going to come out in a healthy way. Here's the parameters.
Yeah.
I will also say that if you're a man in a relationship and you feel an unbridled rage start to form within your own body, and you can feel it coming up, and you have like the desire to start throwing shit, putting your hand through the wall, like whatever it is, your partner could have said something to you, had a shitty day at work, and she just does one thing, or whatever that
Mm-hmm.
looks like for you, it's your responsibility to own that. But for where I'm at in my life as well, there has been so much time that has gone in my life where I felt really ashamed for the way that I feel. And I'm in a place now where we've had enough conversations and I've been able to show enough parts of myself with my partner to be able to say, hey, I've got some anger. I need to move it. Now, the first time I did this, I brought her into the room when I screamed into the pillow, and I just went to town on the mattress. And that was really scary for me because I thought I was bad. Like I felt like I just wasn't good enough. Like I
Yeah.
wasn't worthy of being loved for this part of
Yeah.
myself that was holding on to so much anger and rage. And when I was able to lean into that with her there, you'll notice like even in movies when someone goes into a fit of rage where they start throwing stuff and smashing the cupboards and taking a baseball bat to things, oftentimes they reach this climax and then all of a sudden they just drop to their knees and start crying. It's like anger is always the secondary emotion. It's never actually telling us the truth. It's a coping mechanism. Now, men interact with anger physically. It's like women will often shut down and be somewhat judgmental. And there is that expression of like physicality for some women as well, where they've just seen that representative, like, okay, we're going to start throwing hands. But oftentimes a man, like, we've been culturally, I guess, discouraged from leaning into that because it's attached to so much violence and crime and shame around abuse and all this sort of stuff as well, that we haven't really figured out how to let it out in a healthy way when it comes to relationship. And this is what we go back to. Does your partner have the ability to meet you for where you're at? Throughout this process for myself of being able to lean into this anger, because it's been so present, even today, can be present. It's the more times I've been able to do that, she actually trusts me more, because now I'm not just shutting down. Now I'm not just disconnecting and going off for a drive and then coming back an hour later. Yeah, I'm all good. Sorry about that. It's like, okay, when a woman can see her man alchemize his anger and go through the motions where he's letting it out with its full intensity and then come out the other side of it with the truth of like, okay, like I'm crying my eyes out, like I'm bawling on my hands and knees, like I'm dry heaving on the floor. It's like when your partner can see you do that, there's a level of trust that gets built. Now, in that, sweet, my man can switch that on and he can use it when he needs to. And here's the thing, it's like sometimes, like if you are out in public and someone steps too close or does something disrespectful, then for me, like they're going to get put into the ground. That's something I'm comfortable with. But when it comes to the home front and like feeling that sense of anger that's there, like that's not really a place for it that can stay. It has to be interacted with there for sure, and it will bring it out. But the ability to move that through has been something that I've had to work really hard to do. So it takes practice, but this is the thing as well. It's like when you are at a point where you can hold your partner and be there for that and see that in them, this requires you to see this part of yourself as well. So it's not just me that's interacting with this anger, it's my partner that's doing the same thing, because she's had interactions with anger in her lifetime as well. So she has to meet herself and support herself through that. So collectively,
you're leading in that way by showing.
Yeah, so it's a beautiful place to be in. But the thing about that is, like, for the abuse side of it as well, like, in answer to your question, like the unexpressed anger, that really needs to be felt, and the grief around that whole dynamic where you're sad and you feel so sorry for the person that went through that. Like that version of me that was in that place where it's like, oh, I thought it was my fault. I thought that this was all life was, and I was conditioned to believe that based on someone else's pain. Coming out of that, there's like, what the fuck were they thinking? How dare they? And this isn't coming from a place of, fuck them, like I deserve better, I'm a king and all this sort of stuff. It's like, cool, yeah, like whatever, feel what's there. Feel it. Because if you can do that, if you are so sad, feel your sadness. If you are so fucking angry, lean into that anger in a healthy and safe way as much as you can, because the more you do that, the more you start to bring the realest parts of you online, instead of shutting it down, instead of hiding, instead of getting into another relationship where this person is the person of your dreams and they make you happy until one day it's like, I accidentally crashed your car. And then all of a sudden shit hits the fan. It's like, whoa, I didn't mean to, but now we have to do damage control because we've just had so much anger that's driving all these
this time.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's the answer to that question.
No, that's a great question. I mean, we'll wrap it up here, but I feel that, and it's interesting. I mean, it definitely shows itself, anger, in different ways with men and women for sure. And I feel like I even have people like pointed out, especially on my page. It's interesting, and I'm not sure what kind of reactions you get. Your content, I feel like, is mostly positive, mostly like really good positive stuff for guys. So you probably don't get a lot of hate. But I definitely post some stuff, and I've had people be like, oh, your anger for men is bleeding into your content. And I'm like, I feel called out by that, but I'm going to actually address that right now. And lately I've been like, is there some anger that we need to work on? Like some forgiveness that we need to work through. And that's it, like you were talking about earlier, like this stuff still comes up and these old habits still come up. But now all of a sudden we're aware of them. And that's the first step, right? It's just being aware, but it doesn't mean they're not going to happen again. It doesn't mean they're not going to come up again, but it really makes it easier to surround ourselves with people, places, and things that are going to support us being the best version of ourselves and being able to be clear with like, I want to be the best version for you. And this is what I need to be that, like I saw a little bit of jealousy kind of pop up in me that I hadn't seen in years, and I was like, whoa, there's some healing there, but I wouldn't have even recognized that if I stayed in my little hermit hole, and just didn't talk to people because it didn't come out. But I also recognized like, oh, these are some things that I recognize from the past that I can't tolerate anymore. And my old self would have tolerated them. So like in some ways, like God bless my ability now to speak up and be called a bitch or whatever. But like, at least then I'm clear about this. These are things I'm not okay with, and if people run away from that, if people run away from you being like, I don't want to do X, Y, and Z activity, and they do, and they don't want to hang out with you anymore because that's a beautiful thing. But our little child self has a really hard time doing that because we were taught, not say those things that people aren't going to like, because then people aren't going to like you and then they're going to run away and you're going to be judged. But what a beautiful thing it is when you can own those things, when you can be like, I need to be angry. I need to scream in a pillow right now. Be here with me while I do this. And I think that's so beautiful that you are practicing that. Definitely going to share that with my clients because I think that is an incredible tool because there's so much. And in today's day and age, like obviously it's not just me, like it's so many people. The internet is so mad. There's so many, like I look at some of these comments and like I'll delete them for the most part because there's some meanies, but it also breaks my heart. I'm like, these people are hurting. Like people are hurting. And they need to just get out anger in more healthy ways. And I feel like being like a keyboard warrior is how people do it, these days. But it's really that they just have unresolved traumas that they need to work through. And so like, what a great tool. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Beautiful. But yeah, I really appreciate it as well. At the same time, it's one of those things. It's like you can use a keyboard to express yourself and hide behind that, but you can also use judgment, like people in relationship. You can also use criticism, like you can also use avoidant techniques. The longer that you avoid the parts of yourself that are causing you this discomfort and the fears that are there for you, the longer you try to work your way around them, the more work it takes to actually keep that up. But the more pain that you cause yourself in the long run in that sense. It's like, okay, it's like you've already spent so much of your life figuring out how to be loved. Like, why don't you actually do the things necessary to allow yourself to be in that position where you can love yourself, and then in turn, you can help your partner love you. And there's this emphasis on, okay, this person has to be this way before I get involved with them. Well, okay, that's fine. But are you that way for yourself? Are you honest? Do you practice integrity? Like, are you loyal? Are you disciplined? Do you have capacity to feel your own emotions? Like, if you can do that, look inward, as within, so without. It's that saying. It's like, if you can show up for yourself first and foremost, this is why I've taken the time to be alone, to be on your own. Like, it's such a valuable tool. And for the people who are in that place where it's like, oh, I just want this sort of partner, I just want this sort of relationship, that's all well and good. Like, we all have our desires. Don't abandon those. But take a look at where you're at and what things in your life that you have control over right now, and how can you meet yourself in these areas and be with yourself in your aloneness. Not lonely, but alone in that sense, because you're going to find out so much about yourself. And then in turn, you're going to be able to show up in truth and be there for your partner when they're in a place where they need to be held, they need to be supported. And this is where the teamwork comes into play. But yeah, I appreciate, even the work that you do as well, Charles. It's a big thing. Like for everyone who is in a place where they just don't see a way through and they don't know what to do, this is the perfect time to, one, like be open to the things that you see and hear. If something resonates with you, act on it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes being in like social media space as well, there's so many fucking quotes and sayings and things that you should do, daily habits, morning routines, all this sort of stuff that's like, okay, there's an overload of information. That's great. That sounds really cool. Really creative sentence, like it. But sometimes you'll read something that's like, whoa, that's me.
Yeah.
You know, like I feel that so strongly. That's what you should pay attention to. So all the noise, like at the end of the day, it is all noise. What's real is how you're showing up in your own life. What's real is your ability to have the conversations. What's real is your fear around telling your partner that you're not comfortable with something. Like that's real. That's the learning. And life will teach you all the things you need to know about the areas that you're avoiding. And Peter Crone was the mind architect, he calls himself. He says, life will present you with people and circumstances to help you identify areas where you're not experiencing freedom. Then if you approach life in that way, it's like, okay, I'm here for a reason. I'm with this person for a reason. What's the lesson? What do I have to figure out about myself? And then you move forward with that intention. Don't judge.
Yeah.
Don't start throwing blame. Don't throw a pity party of how shitty your life is. Own it. Feel what you have to, and then get the support that you need. So the people that like are on the fence, it's like, oh, I don't know if I should reach out. Just reach out. Like if we see your comment, then it's for a reason, because there's so many of them. And I don't know about like your DMs, but they just get flooded and people get lost. I open it, all of a sudden I'm doing something and I come back and it's like, it's gone. I'm like, I have no idea where this person went. And I don't have the time to find them. And it sucks. At the same time, you know, that's just how it goes, because that's how it was supposed to go. So the people that we do interact with, this is your time. Like, do the work. Like, show up. Get ready. So.
Yeah. The biggest thing is investing in yourself, right? No matter what you're going through, like there is someone else out there that has gone through it. You are not alone. You're so capable. And I think the biggest thing that we keep hearing here that keeps coming up, right, is like whether it's sadness or anger or joy, like allow yourself to feel through it, to heal through it. The worst thing you can do is to run from those things. And even though culture makes it seem cool to just like be nonchalant, not feel anything, like the strongest thing, the biggest sign of strength for a man or a woman is to be able to have capacity to feel. Like that is what makes us beautiful. That is what makes us so human. And you can't have a relationship without relating. You know, you can't, communication is everything. And it is terrifying, but it is so brave when you're able to show up over and over again. So thank you, Pete, so much for coming onto the pod today. And thank you everyone for listening and watching. Pete's Instagram will be below. So gentlemen, if you want some tips, go over there. He has a lot of good ones.
Appreciate it, Chelsea. Thank you.